As the follow-up for one of the best horror games ever made, Fear and Hunger 2 Termina had plenty to live up to even in its starting moments. The predecessor begins with a somber guitar interrupted by a clattering noise, the tune fading into the wind just as quickly as it came in. This is all symbolic of the adventure that the characters must endure to reach the guard, descending into the unknown and terrible dungeon the moment you're introduced to them. Termina doesn't open with the same sense of mystery, instead starting with stuttering screams of anguish in the distance. The screeches are accompanied by a guitar shortly afterwards, mirroring the first game, though this time around the guitar feels far less ambiguous. In the same way that the first game is informing you on the journey you're about to embark on, Termina's combination of sounds symbolizes the core premise of the game. The characters each visiting the city all carry themselves as citizens unable to partake in the chaos forced by the Termina Festival, until they have no choice. The exploratory wonder and mystery has been replaced by a communal effort to understand exactly what's going on in the city of Prehevil, all while the contestants have a shared motive to stab each other in the back at any turn. Dark Outside is warning you that characters who may seem like simple NPCs are themselves fully fleshed out and ready to take the same actions you likely already have planned should the situation arise. Even the track's name implies the belief that the darkness to commit these atrocities exists isolated away from the individual, as though you refuse to believe what is absolutely necessary here. The theme ends with the guitar completely engulfing the streams with one sharp electric chord. Both the Moon's Cancer and the Termina Festival, forcing the mask to fall off of its participants, and as such there is no reason for the piece to hide under a veneer of safety. Given where Dark Outside plays within the game itself, I also believe that the rift at the end could be an indication of the characters reflecting on their actions up to this point, as the trickster moon god forced their hands and turned normal citizens into murderers. Either way, one thing is clear, and that is that you and your character are going to need to adapt to the Termina Festival fast, or risk returning back to this exact starting screen. No matter which character you choose, the introduction of the game always remains the same. The train passenger reminisces on their life experiences up to now, listening to the rumbling of the train as they recount their story to the audience. Not all histories are created equal, and as such, it is important to nail the atmosphere of the setting in a single piece, regardless of who you may have chosen for a first playthrough. Memories achieves this through a wistful, almost distant melody, fitting the nostalgic recollections. The whole song is fairly simple in its composition, allowing the character story to shine while also maintaining a presence through its otherworldly sounds. All of this allows the track to be slotted in effortlessly into any character story, as the main emotion elicited by this piece is that of curiosity and reflection. The slower music is some of the most interesting in Termina, as they reflect a greater emphasis on the narrative and the importance of the 14 contestants. By giving each character more involved and elaborate backstories, their importance becomes clear and further builds a connection for the players to grasp onto relative to the original 4 dungeon explorers. As you finish going over your character's backstory, the music fades away, leaving only the metallic creaking of the train closing in on Prehevil. The passenger slowly drifts back to sleep so that they can get ready for their departure.
You feel like someone was watching you while you slept.
You get up from the seat to investigate, more or less alone on the train as others rest like you were just moments ago. But why are there so many suitcases? The lack of music furthering the tension as you notice a doorway formed out of everyone's rearranged luggage.
This place, it's not the train anymore.
The music is complemented by the appearance of a bizarre-looking assailant. You can choose to agitate him into a confrontation, or be forced into labor immediately. Being put to work also gives you time to question what exactly is going on. A creeping violin signals the tightrope that your sanity has already begun to walk on just by entering this realm. It almost sounds like the type of feedback noise you would get from a microphone or cell phone. The exact kind of uncanny tune which immediately puts anyone on edge, particularly due to how unexpected it may be. The violin is followed by a metallic clank, fitting not only due to the literal metal workshop, but also because this is seemingly a realm of sacrifice for cultists such as the janitor. This is one of the many clues to the reality of this place. You've entered the domain of the gods, and you are little more than a worker for their greater purpose. Every few seconds, a boom can be felt, like the overwhelming presence of a god watching over you, slowly driving any resident of this realm to insanity. The only normal sound left for you is the train still chugging away, each track being distinct while your sanity's plummeting. There is a passageway into the darkness, but by now you should know that this unknown darkness oftentimes is far worse than anything you could see.
A mysterious person greets you in a monotonous voice.
Is this really that much better? That's at least the immediate sense that green Hue Moon instills, as the raving madness from the last piece is traded for a suspicious piano fading up the trickster moon god and its subordinates. There's a heavy contrast between the two parts of the game's introduction, potentially an effort to reduce your suspicion, as the Moon Tower feels far safer at first glance. By having Percolé be the one to both remove us from the workshop and Hall of the Gods, plus the deliberate obscurity surrounding the Termina Festival, you feel some trust for the two figures in the tower, well, at least as much as you can trust someone else in Fear and Hunger. At the same time, the player should know the general conduct of the gods and their followers in this world by now, and I think that's where the mysterious instrumentation comes from. The music is a reminder that we should always be wary of these deities, as the Termina Festival is something unknowingly forced onto the 14 contestants. As the music progresses, the static and feedback noises return once more. The electronic interference has been closely tied to the dream that the player is having, drawing more suspicion towards Rayer, as Percolé himself alludes to the moon's control over the dream world. The instrument in the middle of the piece also sounds like the babbling of an individual, likely driven to lunacy due to the effects of the moon. Percolé also makes note of how the moon god is unable to heed your words, immediately positioning both the piece and Rayer as utterly incomprehensible for the mortals underneath it.
You wake up suddenly. Was it all just a dream? The train, it seems to have stopped.
Awakening from the nightmare leaves your character in the same train seat that they had fallen asleep on, though they have finally reached their destination. It's odd for the music to be cut off while leaving the train car. The train actually has its own dedicated theme, which makes this a deliberate choice by Miro on the player's first venture outside. Given this intentionality, it feels a bit like a callback to the first game, though the situations are inverted. In Fear and Hunger, you begin in the harrowing outdoors, silence penetrated by barking dogs and cawing crows, which force you to enter the precarious dungeon. Termina instead positions this silence as a luxury. You already know something isn't right about this city, but there's no choice aside from leaving this train. You have all the time you could need to walk around in here, burdened only by your depleting hunger and sanity. But eventually, you will be forced outside into a city that has already bared the full weight of the moon god's cancer. Autumnal Forest therefore carries a very similar foreboding to the tracks found in the dungeon, primarily in the deafening sounds that you're immediately greeted with. When you get out into the foggy world, the silence is broken by the ear-pounding noise to immediately show that being outside won't suddenly make you safer than when trapped indoors. The vibrating low note eventually becomes slightly more audible, but it never fails to leave this sinking feeling in your stomach, as the discomforting tone signals some kind of creature prowling in wait for your approach. The rest of the piece isn't much more comforting either, as the howl of an animal can constantly be heard fading in and out, only serving to further disorient the player as to what could be lurking in this forest. The violin in the background completes the unsettling nature, as what is presumably a piercing wind passing by you could just as easily be interpreted as the squeaking brakes on your train coming to a sudden stop before dumping you into this terrifying forest. This is a fantastic way to set up that outdoors in Termina are by no means a lavish escape from the influence of the god. In fact, the outside is arguably just as deadly, with the forest inhabitants carrying an intimate knowledge of this area that you sorely lack. Returning to the train after your initial departure will play the save room theme to replace the silence which you were previously met with. Though I don't have much to say about this specific track, I think generally it's interesting that Termina's musical approach is vastly different from the last game. Where Fear and Hunger had a fairly consistent auditory ethos in its music, Termina tends to lean more into creating fitting pieces for each segment of the game. I won't go too into detail with the first game as I've already covered it, but the music found in the dungeon shares a general unity with one another. Aside from the use of white static noise, which will be brought up more later, the Termina soundtrack is generally more varied. I think much of this stems from wanting to show how different the lives of the contestants are compared to the protagonists of The Cruel Age. Where everyone exploring the dungeons more or less at the same goal, the ones descending onto Prehevil are completely ignorant of the festival and the eventual fate they'll all go through. Everyone has their individual motivations to visit the city, and many of the passengers even see Prehevil as either a desperate escape from their past or a destination worth going to for answers. The save room theme is therefore an apt title for this melody, since the cabins where you begin the game are completely separated from the reality of Prehevil. Other horror games use save rooms and their music as a way to completely isolate you from the monsters chasing closely behind, the music immediately being a clear indicator that you can finally relax and take a breather. In Termina, the isolation is far more psychological, as this train is the last shred of ignorance that the contestants are afforded before they head back outside into the embrace of the moon. Heading towards the lake changes the background music from the nerve-wracking forest tune to a subtler ambiance. As you face out to the lake, the sounds of a gasping, likely drowning villager can be heard, like you're walking in just a moment too late to stop someone's grim end. For only a brief moment, you can hear a stringed instrument play that leaves just as quickly as it's introduced, perhaps being the calm before that the song is titled after. Despite the title, however, there is an underlying sickening breathing that can be heard, perhaps connected to the previous victim. The lake was once a site of ritualistic sacrifice, a place where children were tossed in and left behind to appease the gods. When you arrive, ignorant of this reality, there is an inherent serenity to the lake which stretches vastly beyond your field of view. Is there some way to swim or boat out there, escape the clutches of Prehevil to live another day? You don't get long to contemplate this, as the truth of the situation once again sets in. Footsteps grow louder, as if an unknown presence is stopping you from even thinking about the lake as a viable form of escape. Towards the end of the piece, one may hear a familiar chanting that signals the cult members of Almere, preparing their next body for a watery demise. This ominous presence serves to give a taste as to the type of forces that you'll be made to face after you leave the calm of this serene lake. Calm before is actively warning you of what can be expected of the citizens, who are all fully indulged in their deepest horrifying secrets by the time you'll see them. Overworld enemy encounters in Termina are given far less of an immediate startling presence, largely because the stinger for being noticed by foes is much more subtle than in the first game. Termina doesn't have the loud piano alert that became synonymous with the first entry's enemies. Instead relying on the screen closing in as your heart rate begins to spike, while the malicious entity follows behind. There is also a static overlay of noise that accompanies the adrenaline rush of the player. This initial lack of major punch to getting spotted leads me to believe that this is very intentional on Miro's part, as unlike in the first game, Termina actively forces you to fight for your best chance at survival. Fear and Hunger 1 never directly incentivized you into combat, often being something to prepare for and that would leave you far worse off if you didn't plan accordingly. In Termina, however, both the narrative and music point to a necessity to get your hands dirty. Deciding to leave Prehevil is a declaration that you're already willing to cut down your fellow contestants, and the best way to do that is to upgrade yourself for the best chance of survival. The truest form of upgrading yourself in this game is by sawing off the heads of your fallen foes to become notably stronger. Therefore, this startling piano wouldn't fit with the core of Termina, since you're hunting the enemy just as much as they're hunting you. Breath of the Moon starts the moment that the combat screen pops up, immediately transitioning into a single drum beat, alongside a perpetually high-pitched piano akin to a heartbeat monitor about to flatline. As the anxiety of combat begins to get to you, the heartbeat becomes more erratic and asynchronous with the rest of the song. In fact, none of the aspects of this song really gel with one another. The introductory drum cascades into a tribal beat, you and your enemy fighting to see who will be the eventual sacrifice for the moon god. Fitting of Fear and Hunger's most anxiety-inducing tracks, there's an odd gurgling that intensifies in the background of the piece. While this would normally be associated with hunger, the sound might actually be your heart dropping to your stomach. Despite how little of the theme joins together harmoniously, there's still a mesmerizing aspect to it because of the tension and stress it squeezes out of the player. Hoping that you could narrowly avoid the enemy's sight or call the coin toss that'll otherwise lead to your demise, there is a high to be had when all goes exactly to plan, and maybe that's exactly what the Termina Festival asks of you.
You hear distant screams and ramblings. You are not alone.
A strange callback to the first game is found when you first enter Old Town Prehevil. The sound of flies is the exact same sample as the one used for Basement of Flies for the first game. To me, this reference serves as the first true indicator that Prehevil and its residents have fallen under the same enigmatic curse that the dungeons once had, unable to be reasoned with and out to get you at every turn. Entering the old town means that you've already encountered at least a couple of oddities by now, but being inside of Prehevil itself has confirmed the fact that there's far more to this trip than a simple trek towards the tower. To drive home the insanity of the people, the music during your exploration of this dilapidated place has plenty of groaning, which signals the mindless zombie-esque nature of the villagers that you may try to converse with. This runs in contrast with what is displayed visually though, as you see the Moonscorch villagers setting up a crucifixion in the middle of the square. This begs the question of if the Moonscorch retained more of their mind than you were initially aware of, or if the village already held on to some heinous practices even before the moon god's arrival. All of these isolated aspects culminate into the finale of the theme, as a ritual chant begins to form out of the citizens of Prehevil, a purposeful drum now signaling them all to celebrate in the capture of another subject for their god. Venturing into the mayor's manor teaches a lesson on how to properly utilize sound to create tension in the absence of music. The manor is odd in that there are two different ambient noises that replace any semblance of a soundtrack. The first two floors have an invisible clock tick away, while the basement has the same heart pounding that could be heard when running away from enemies. Henrik actually confirms that the clock is diegetic, pointing out the absurdity of a clock being audible throughout the entire place despite none actually existing. Though it's the clock's effects on him which clues you into its purpose for the player. You're supposed to feel the madness that this ever-present reminder of time inflicts onto the contestants. Henrik in particular has several associations with time, as someone who always strived for greatness during his lifetime and didn't want to squander his peak. Henrik himself also points out the threat of starvation, so having the clock be just out of reach but always heard is essentially a torture method as he slowly succumbs to the moon scorching. The Termina Festival already has deep associations with time, as you were given a strict limit on the days that you can let pass before something happens under Perclay's watch. Saving has been shifted from a short-term coin flip risk to a far harsher decision filled with its own ramifications. Every time you rest, a portion of the day passes, giving much more weight to the scarcity of time that the contestant has before the end of the festival. The basement's heartbeat is more difficult to pin down thematically, though it's likely included to keep a constant state of anxiety in the player, constantly worried about the chance of an enemy and ironically one of the few completely safe spaces in Prehevil. Being a basement means that there's only one exit out of this place in case the situation goes awry, and you have no clue of what could be down here on your first visit. This is also after you had to deal with or dodge the priest upstairs that was guarding the key to food storage, meaning there's already plenty of reason to suspect that things could be far worse down here. Surely there's something or someone keeping this place safe that you have to challenge? The reality is far more boring than that though, as the only thing down here is potatoes and a locked door keeping away the true horrors of this place. It's an intelligent way to subvert the player's expectations while still keeping them constantly on edge. Both the character and player feel tense despite the necessary rate of this place to keep everyone alive and fed. The Mayor's Manor can also be your first glimpse into the true nature of the Termina Festival. If you happen to have Rayer's skin Bible, then you can draw his sigil on the prayer circle formerly occupied by the decrepit priest. Interacting with the ritual circle teleports you to an alternate dimension, the same one you saw at the beginning of the game. This area is one of two which change up the music in Rayer's dimension, usually just playing Closing Madness like in the workshop. What makes the Manor intriguing is that, of the two unique Rare Dimension tracks, this one is entirely optional and could theoretically never be found. I personally had no idea it was even here until my third playthrough. Its inclusion serves as an immense shock to the player. Again, depending on how many times you've visited Rare's Dimension by now, you're used to hearing Closing Madness, and some of the shock of that song may have even worn off by now. By differentiating this chunk of the Nightmare realm from all the others, it once again gives the Manor an odd tension that implies something far more sinister going on in what is otherwise a fairly standard section of the town. The piece itself aids in the unsettling of the player, as animal sounds are used in a way that makes them sound alien. They're so quickly drowned out by a pulsating beat and rhythmic bells that for a moment it's impossible to even tell what you're hearing, before they take center stage once more alongside the wailing of the many sacrifices that the Termina Festival required. Could this be the creatures in Prehevil picking away at the people, defenseless as they become prey for the higher being? I don't think so, for the simple reason that this piece returns during one of the endings of the game far later down the road. It's the reuse of this theme that convinced me that the dimension we are being pushed through isn't one of Rare's influence. Not anymore, at least. Instead, Rare's dimension has been usurped by the ones who claim to be working under him. The cries in the background are far more likely the victims, who are now burning for all of eternity in Percole's hidden scheme. The animal screeches are instead the privileged few who were deemed worthy by the messenger of the Sulfur God, now little more than emissaries for the twisted Sulfur God that holds true control over this deranged festival. While the Sulfur God takes a backseat to the other deities in the story of Termina, its influence is unmistakable as the true catalyst for what is going on in Prehevil. This random inclusion of its theme holds far more significance towards informing us of how much power it actually holds despite its limited appearance. After cleaning out the manor of any supplies and information, there's only one space left for you to explore before entering the city proper. Venturing back into the forest leads to a suspicious hatch guarded by mutated dogs. The tunnels of Prehevil take us back to the ambient tone-setting sounds that one may associate with fear and hunger. Under your feet greets you with metal bending and creaking while you descend the ladders, unsure of the function of these tunnels and what may be lurking within them. Akin to the many tracks of the first game, Under Your Feet is predominantly composed of silence, at least at the start. There's almost a deliberate nature to how the pipes clang, like an intentional beat created by a creature hiding within the walls. It takes nearly a minute for the background noise to be replaced by something akin to a rhythm. Though this may be intentional to gear the player's attentions towards other sounds in the tunnel. Even then, the beat that does play is so low that you may not even notice it until it morphs into a radio static, eerily similar to the ones that play when an enemy is chasing you. This could be Termina's equivalent of an auditory jump scare, knowing that you would likely associate these odd noises with an enemy approaching, or it might be a way for Mirror to tell you that there's already something to be scared of here, and I don't just mean the man gleefully sawing away through a fellow contestant. Unbeknownst to the player, there's actually a second potential assailant within the tunnels. If you happen to visit the manor first before finding the hatch, the needles will be replaced by, well, nothing, initially. After dumping some gasoline into the generator required to progress, you'll start to hear an exceptionally loud banging from where you came from. The static frequency you've been hearing is actually a hint towards the madness that has been associated with the moon god. Maybe that's why the sounds have all felt so deliberate and foreboding. Soon enough, the static will be joined by the walls being pounded on. Something unnatural is trying to break through. It hears your footsteps, it wants you. And you better be good at running by now, because if you can't dodge your assailant, then I don't know how you expect to make it out alive. Seeing as the sewers don't have a dedicated background song, the trek into the main parts of Prehevil is the best time to discuss one of the key ways in which Termina amplifies the audio-based horror of fear and hunger. One of the cornerstones of the franchise is creating horror through uncertainty. You never truly know what monster could be lurking away from your field of view. The first game ups the stakes by having a lot of key moments where audio associated with enemies would play in the overworld, with the primary moments being the dogs at the start of the game and the entrance of the Crow Mauler. Termina yet again iterates on the use of overworld ambience in a masterful way, as the game puts far more focus on creating tension with the enemies and environment. This is achieved by having plenty of audio cues be directly tied to your character's position and or if an enemy has spotted you. Noises such as needles sawing away at Tanika's head, the moon scorch busting down the wall, or the crazed woman screaming at you are all direct consequences of your own movement, rather than simply being global noises which played, like when the Dark Priest can be found in the first game. Areas such as the Manor and Sewer completely forego having any music, and subsist entirely on occasional background and dynamic noises. There are also plenty of buildings which you can briefly explore that completely cut off the music, once again creating a discomfort because you're never sure if this is simply a moment of silence for you or a warning that you should watch your back for anything out of sight. Foes being able to dynamically create sound also means that facing them on in the overworld is far more terrifying. Getting jump scared by the gunman near the lake is not that uncommon, as he can begin taking potshots at you before you could even see him. The game also takes various cues from the Crow Mauler, as a myriad of stalker enemies exist that will impede your progress in different ways. Each stalking enemy has a unique tell for their arrival. Whether it be the revving of a chainsaw or a maniacal echoing laugh, you immediately know to either run as far as you can or prepare for some of the biggest struggles the game has to offer. Finally entering the city through the sewer lands you right at the center of Prehevil, and you can immediately tell that this place is no escape from the lunacy you've already had to endure. The song fittingly begins with a crescendo that escalates as you exit the underground and witness the occupied street that you land on. The piece seems to follow the player and character along through its various stages. Once the initial shock of finally seeing Prehevil is worn off, disorientation sets in just as quickly. How do you get to the tower from here, and what direction should you even go in? Up to this point, simply getting here was your goal. What better way to simulate the discomfort that the characters are feeling than by utilizing a high-pitched computerized buzzing for much of the track, which somehow feels even more digital than all the other tones you've heard thus far. Once you finally get used to the disheveled street, the theme slowly introduces more traditional instruments, but then samples the sound effect played by the policemen, who you will quickly become well acquainted with. It's almost as though, even when you're finally becoming acclimated with your surroundings, you always need a reminder that this isn't just some forgotten and abandoned city. If anything, the lively atmosphere of this place serves as a reminder of how sought after Prehevil's secrets truly are. Alone Prehevil is a heavy departure from the other overworld themes in this franchise, but that doesn't make it out of place or immersion breaking. The track title has a double meaning. Though you're constantly reminded that you are literally not alone while dodging bullets and batons, nothing in Prehevil is here to quell any of your loneliness or anxieties. Little details like the instrument randomly cutting out for just a fraction of a second serve to keep the cohesion with the rest of the soundtrack, while also maintaining the eerie atmosphere that the game has worked tirelessly to create. There's also a significant amount of time dedicated to a percussive solo, and Termina generally leans heavier on drum beats even compared to the first game. Given the hectic nature of your first arrival to Prehevil's central streets, this may be a subtle way for Termina to mimic the pulsing heartbeats that the first game's soundtrack was already well known for. The use of drums likely stems from how much of Prehevil's condition can be directly attributed to the war that has torn the Eastern Union asunder. It's almost as though you're listening to the drumline of the Bremen Empire as they tear through the streets of the city in search of the experiments buried deep underneath. Where Alone Prehevil made your intro to the city as tense as everything which came before your arrival, Remaining Routine takes a far more somber and mellow approach. Perhaps it is the more personal human nature of the shopping district which brings out more sadness than usual. A reminder that Prehevil was once a bustling city full of regular people before the influence of Reyr or the Bremen Empire. It's not like the shopping district is devoid of enemies. If anything, some of the more threatening foes that you can face are here, but there's even a sadness to the bell tolls of the Inquisitor, the moon scorch tainting his devout beliefs, or the coping amalgamate of heads who lash out after being turned into an abomination. This area is also relatively intact compared to the rest of the city. There are even little food stalls, movie advertisements, and a fortune teller that make this almost seem normal. This district remains relatively unaffected by much of what's going on in the city, with the only real obstacle from the war being the rubble blocking off the road. This isn't to say that the shopping district is an escape from reality the same way that other places may be, as there is an ever-present bird call that can be heard. While it may seem like a simple interruption to the song at first, the more likely interpretation is that this is symbolic of Kaiser and his army destroying the lives of the citizens. Both the Knights of the Midnight Sun and the Bremen Empire use eagles as their insignia of choice, so use of avian imagery can likely be tied back to the central antagonist. Tranquility of this place is also rather misleading, as later portions of the game will reveal the truth of the city, even before any influence by the festival. Therefore, remaining routine might be more fitting as a piece for the ignorance that the average citizens held, as they were unaware of the cruelties going on which would eventually destroy their home. I also wanted to take a quick detour to discuss arguably the scariest location in this game. There's a random clothing store that has no real significance to your adventure, and doesn't even have items to collect, but it has one of the most oppressive enemies in the entire franchise. When you explore further, there's a loud sound that just continues to play for your entire time down there, the only thing worth looking at being an obelisk made of collared shirts. You can also hear a mysterious woman saying something completely undecipherable, and fighting this enemy literally does nothing but drain your sanity and time. You can totally neglect this store and it has zero bearing on the rest of your experience, but that's kind of why I wanted to point it out. It's a cool and unique way that Mira tried to scare the shit out of the player for no reason other than the fun of it. I think it speaks to the talent and care that an individual puts into a project when they just have random instances such as these that have no real reason to exist other than for you to stumble on it, be horrified, and then question the purpose of it forever.
The club is in a state of standstill, waiting for the horrors to end.
Lost Haven is the first of 4 pieces that you'll hear not made by Miro, instead being created by Chili Makes Music. At the risk of spoiling my thoughts on Chili's other contributions, I think each are composed fantastically for their respective segments. I've mentioned a couple times how Termina carries a lot more variation in its OST, and Lost Haven is the perfect example. This almost doesn't sound like a song that belongs in Fear and Hunger, and especially not after the horrors you witness on the street before it. After wading through rotting, burnt down buildings and creepy clothing stores, you expect those stairs to lead to just another disturbed ruin of the old Prehevil, but instead you get a reminder of how human the city once was. It's a glimpse at what Prehevil was and could have been had it not been obliterated by the war and cultists leading to its eventual destruction. I would argue that Lost Haven is far more reminiscent of a save theme, though unlike the more subdued save room compositions you'll hear in horror games including this one, there's an intentional vibrance to the piece that runs counter to Fear and Hunger's general musical language. You've likely died a plethora of times and had to reset your run over and over, but it's reaching Prehevil Bop when you finally get the sense that all of that was kind of worth it, since you finally have somewhere to rest for just a bit. I also think it's a fantastic tension breaker because, as Termina is just generally a longer game than the first entry, you may eventually become fatigued by the constant dread and combat. By having an area that the player knows they can always retreat to and relax, particularly in the center of where you'll spend most of your time, then they're both aware of the progress they've made as well as willing to finally sleep. It's oddly appropriate that one of the first places the player will likely feel fine enough to save is a lounge bar designed to let the local freedom fighters rest. Lost Haven and the bar also fit perfectly with the sentiment that the game has been trying to establish with the player. The bar is one of the only times in the game that the characters are each fully transparent and honest with both you and themselves regarding the Termina Festival. For once, you're not worried that these people might have some sort of ulterior motive or will transform into one of the many abominations outside. The human element of everyone comes out, and because of the jazzy arrangement, you're also much more receptive and inherently comforted by their presence. I almost wonder if Miro intentionally created this friendly atmosphere just to make the eventual slaughter of the contestants all the more grueling on the heart, knowing that they'll either be transformed or not live long enough to become moonscorched.
The city of Prehevil, a city that has fallen from grace.
It's almost heartbreaking having to drag yourself out of Prehevil Bop and back into the murderous city. But after resting up a bit and preparing yourself for the journey towards the tower, your next stop is likely towards the war-torn western Prehevil. If you were skeptical of how much the conflict had taken from the city, then this will be the spot that shows exactly how bad it's been. The somber acoustic guitar, which the song begins with, laments the people whose lives were lost, either due to the battle against Kaiser or the Termina Festival that cropped up to stop his plan. You're dodging mines and walking amongst crumbled debris, but in the back of your head there always exists a thought of how much was lost on the whims of those who orchestrated this war. Then, as if being snapped back to reality, the song quickly kicks into a marching band-esque formula. Not only is this one of the highlights of the soundtrack, purely from how hard it hits, but it's also a fantastic way to lock the player back into the sense of danger that they may have forgotten after relaxing at the bar moments ago. The drum and bass could be a signifier of the enemies marching towards you, but I actually think it's more fitting as yet another signifier of the soldiers who are parading down these same streets, being placed into an unwinnable conflict by higher beings in much the same way the contestants were. This is accompanied by an airy sound which reminds of a platoon responding back to the call of their superior, readying themselves for what's to come. The marching seamlessly transitioning into a radio static, at this point the main leitmotif of Termina that informs you of how little the resistance against Kaiser and the gods really mattered. Before heading deeper into Prehevil, one can actually venture south and transition from the shopping district back into the deep forest. The theme of this place is yet another fitting return to the ambient form of Fear and Hunger's music, the wind noises being more pronounced than before, while still relatively quiet to set the mood for the forest. Unlike previous nature areas though, there's this bizarre feedback that is present almost as soon as the song starts up. This feedback is shortly joined by a pulsing beat, which nearly overpowers the previous wind to fight for control from the piano melody. These two play concurrently, but they feel at odds with each other, constantly getting louder to one-up the opposition. This feels intentionally emblematic of the overall theme of Termina. The natural and melodic sounds of the forest are trying to push back against the industrial interference, with neither being able to fully dominate the other. There's a rattling which is introduced along with a very distorted guitar, and all of this feels like a callback to the many cultists and forest dwellers that one can encounter while uncovering this place's secrets. Though they are presumably all human, they have taken to worshipping Venushka and actively avoiding Prehevil in favor of their own segment away from it all. Yet there are constant interruptions and trespassing by both the current day contestants and the previous researchers who violated their deep sanctuary to further their progress on the machine god. As if this place can't get more mysterious though, coming here during the night will actually introduce another factor to the main theme, a masked woman singing on top of a stone platform. You can attempt to interrupt her song and try to get some info out of her, but she just stands there, singing. Who knows for how long she's been doing this or how long before she leaves. It adds another layer to an already creepy area that, despite being completely optional, is rather hard to truly forget. In a place where the moon's madness forced everyone to fight, she instead chose to sing to it. After your strange and potentially lethal excursion into the forest is over, you can instead go north deeper into the city and stumble upon St. Domecq's orphanage. An inquisitor sits just outside of the school, ringing a bell as if mimicking its former life, trying to beckon children towards the grounds for their old lessons. This may initially cause you to expect the orphanage to have yet another horror theme, but Chili once again completely shifts our expectation of what the Fear and Hunger soundtrack is capable of. Fear and Hunger has never been shy about including children in its brutality. Just look at the eponymous god. But the very introduction of Wayward Souls as you enter the orphanage is the first time you could truly feel the repercussions of being a child in this heartless world. There's such a dense sadness with just the introduction of Wayward Souls. Where many previous pieces push a sense of anxiety onto the player, with this one you immediately get the sense that something far worse is going on behind the scenes. Unlike the rest of Prehevil, which one could be fooled into believing was a peaceful city prior to the moon's plague, the orphanage unravels that belief and shows the true nature of all Mare's servants. Where Fear and Hunger has excelled previously at the absurd horror and the monsters that have been created within the world, the orphanage is one of the first times that we see a far more grounded type of monster.
A chained skeleton. Looks like the remains of a child. The child has been dead for a long while. Whatever is happening in this city isn't the cause of death.
It's not as though Miro has strayed away from sensitive subjects in the past, but St. Domex is different in that one cannot delude themselves into thinking this is due to the influence of the old gods or any external beings. The implications through world building and party dialogue make it clear that this was a place of immense torment for the children that were supposed to be housed here. And that way, the strings give a sense of nostalgia without ever being truly warm or coddling. As if the children who once inhabited these halls always tried to make this place into a home before being pushed to a cruel fate. The softer side of the song is constantly trying to break past the bleak elements, such as the encompassing static or the piercing winds in the background, but the strings are constantly forced to share a space with the ominous bass. After so much time and awareness of their surroundings, it's likely that the children of this orphanage are keenly aware that their hopes are for naught. At least, that's what the first half of the track seems to symbolize, as the second chunk allows the strings to finally play unimpeded. So much emotion is packed into this small section, which allows what little comfort to finally pull through. But this too is compromised by how it's sandwiched between the dreadful and cold instruments that remind us of the fate of these poor kids. Maybe in some ways, this is informing you that your presence here is necessary, not because the moon-scorched youth are salvageable, but because someone has to do something about it. As horrid as the feeling is, the fallen cherubs that roam this building are incapable of being reasoned with. Rare's curse regressing their mind to the point of toddlers who simply don't understand what is happening anymore. These children unfortunately need to be put out of their misery, but that doesn't make the task any easier on the player. All of this is compounded further by the most unique element of Wayward Souls. It persists within battles as well. Unlike every other song in the franchise, Wayward Souls will continue uninterrupted until you exit the orphanage, and this only heightens the impact of an already haunting song. Once again, none of this is the fault of those who have suffered the worst kind of fate, so it only makes sense that the contestant would rather lament their fate than allow their adrenaline for combat to spike, like is the case with the other battle themes. Even the ghosts that linger with some consciousness left in them don't truly harm you, only piecing away at your mind, though not outwardly malicious if the Ouija board side quest is to be believed. Nothing here really wants to hurt you, and the decision to leave the theme playing in combat elevates an already exceptional area of the game. Interestingly, Father Hugo at the top of the orphanage doesn't disturb the track either, though this may be a hint that the contestants' fear and anxiety of the priest is vastly outweighed by the grief that exploring this place has impacted them with. There's no glory in taking down this sickening man since, for all intents and purposes, he's already achieved what he wanted from this place, and we're simply doing our best to help out those who have suffered enough. After exiting the transformed orphanage with the first effigy in hand, you may stumble into an initially unassuming apartment building.
Quiet. All the sounds from outside are muffled by thick walls.
The moment you step foot just a little bit too far into the housing complex, the door, locking behind you, points out how great of a mistake this may be. This is the only non-endgame area which forces you to complete it or die trying. Despite the tension of this lack of choice, the apartments actually lean towards an atmospheric soundscape, contrasting the emotionally intense nature of the orphanage music. Instead of a full arrangement of instruments, all you are given is a high-pitched buzz and a very low, bassy noise. The only creatures left in this place are the mosquitoes hovering aimlessly for a target, and anything unlucky enough to be consumed by the mold. You can just faintly make out the bells of the Church of Almere while you're in here. All of this is very subtle, likely because the apartment creates unease in other facets, namely its visual design and the aforementioned forces keeping you here. There's a lot of unexplained, bizarre things going on in the apartment, from the obvious disgusting mold that coats every part of this place to the random, loud television which plays an unfamiliar video of Karen, who has no recollection of this broadcast even being made. If you venture into the deepest section of the apartments, you will also stumble upon a rattling sound, which reveals itself to be a washing machine. There's so much that doesn't really make sense in this place, and much of it isn't explained even after you're freed from its grasp. This may stem from the namesake of the track, as this area contains the most overt reference to the Sulfur God within the game itself. Perhaps the moaning that could be heard as you linger in the apartments is a signal to the strange deity or its followers who have taken over this place. It's hard to know for sure, but I do think its presence in the apartment is the most overt evidence that what was believed to be Rare's dimension is being co-opted by the actual organizers of this twisted festival. How do you continue to intensify the terror that a player may feel? You've probably already seen the neighbors either in the sewers or on the second floor of the apartments, so that won't work. You've already seen multiple iterations of Rare's twisted dimension, so some of that horror may have already lost its luster. I think that's what makes the music so important in these games, since it is difficult to continuously iterate on monster or overworld designs without making the whole thing feel incohesive. Plus, you may not want this random apartment to suddenly be completely different from the rest of the setting you've built before it. Music, though, always has the opportunity to evolve, so that the feel of an environment can be completely different from the rest of the game. Even trying to jump scare the player through mechanics may fall flat at this point, given the previously mentioned instances where enemies have already conditioned you to expect their quick and unrelenting attacks. Maybe the next best place to try to scare a player is not in what they see, but what they hear. Before tackling the obvious, let's rewind back a bit to discuss what the song does outside of giving everyone a minor heart attack. Of the Termina music thus far, this one has by far the most organic sound to it. Literally, there's a perpetual pulsating that occurs in the left ear, as though you've already entered into the stomach of the disgusting Sulfur God. The rhythmic instruments playing are the only consistent factor in this song, as though they are present to give you something to latch onto in an otherwise completely absurd sound, the last shred of sanity you possess in this place. Conversely, it may be a way for the dimension to keep some faint glint of hope that you may get out of this place unbothered. Then there's the screaming. At first it's modulated, so it's hard to tell what it's supposed to be. But hearing the human yell right after pretty much tells you that every sound is indicative of the torment this place incites. It feels safe to say that the anguish shouts and oppressive atmosphere of the Flipside apartment is meant to represent the burning sulfur pit that the eponymous god is submerged in. The only way for these unsettling instruments to cease is by having the anguish shouts lead directly into the screeching violin that makes this piece so famous. It doesn't matter how powerful you become or how simple the neighbor enemies actually are for you to beat at this point. The sharp strings will nonetheless make your stomach drop, to the point where all you can once again feel is fear. Nothing ever accompanies this drop, no new foes, cutscenes, or revelations, but that doesn't stop the anxiety from spiking as you desperately seek a way out of this horrid place. Ironically, the enemy encounters give you a brief break from this music, only to immediately shock you back in once you're done fighting. After the initial attack on the ears fades away, it's still not a particularly pleasant theme, further incentivizing you to rush through this place so you can turn your back on it for good.
Your footsteps echo in the presence of the older gods.
For how much you've had to endure, both emotionally in the orphanage and mentally in the apartments, Almair's church offers little to disorient you. It's almost a refreshingly honest tune, as though the church has no reason to distort under the encroaching god, since they've already long accepted that they are willing to be subjugated. The church is also the true head of Prehevil, so by now, their wicked practices and exiling of the citizens has made them infamous yet impenetrable. All you really hear outside of the introductory flourish is a background singing, potentially emblematic of how the church's influence is a thing of the past, compared to the wrath of the gods who now plague Prehevil. By the time you enter the church, everyone has already been slaughtered by a ritual of their own making. Perhaps the reason that we only ever hear this type of choir is because the church's power now only exists within its own walls. Most of the ambiance is actually composed of what sounds like a distant breathing, and much like the apartments before it, this is likely another indicator of the victims imprisoned under the church. Since you have to scale multiple levels to find the effigy here, it makes sense that much of the noise feels far away. You are quite literally ascending to the scaffolds while there's an entire chunk of the church several stories below. Depending on when you enter the church, you will even learn the fate of the leader of this sect of Almere. Though, much like with Henrik and Abella, something as inconsequential as sleeping through the morning will have cascading ramifications for your adventure. The one who dealt the final blow to the church's head can actually be reasoned with in Rare's dimension, should you beeline it straight to her without taking a moment to rest. But with little knowledge of her fate, you are likely to have slept just to cash in on the many soul stones you've collected by now. Doing so will trigger a change in the contestant. With no one to help her emotionally navigate her first murder, she will instead justify her actions, with the moon's curse slowly tainting her head before fully altering her into something different.
Marina, you came. I knew you'd come for me. What do you mean? Why are you playing this role? Can't you see this world? Look around. Look at the boarded walls. Look at the darkness that hangs above. It's a world created just for us. This world won't judge us. We can be one. You just have to see what it has to offer. We can craft our own world. It can be just how you like. We can't waste this opportunity. It's not a coincidence that we both ended up in Prehevil. This is destiny. Why are you this difficult all of a sudden? It's me, Samari. We've met each other countless times at the Vatican City, on the long hallways of the Ministry of Darkness. You know me, and I know you. We've shared our most private times together. I've seen your true self. I've seen how you spend hours every morning just to get your makeup right. I've seen you caress yourself. I know you wake up every night just to finish the book you fell asleep to. All those gazes we shared. I know you hate your father. I know you want him dead. I killed him, I know. That's why I crafted all of this for you. I killed him. I didn't want him to taint our new world. This is what remains of him. Do you understand now? But, what? I don't get this.
The very first sound that you hear upon facing down a moon-scorched contestant is one intentionally evocative of the Crow Mauler. Immediately, the game positions the Moonscorched and any other mini-boss on a fairly high pedestal for their importance. All of a sudden, your decisions have a direct consequence, as you are forced to fight these juiced-up enemies all while the soundtrack is repeatedly screaming back at you. The drum beat has a ritualistic flair to it. This is exactly what Percolate wanted out of the festival. Your actions and inability to aid your fellow contestant has fed into the dark wishes of the host that wants Prehevil to fall. And the constant, distorted pulsing serves to show how your character likely holds some amount of responsibility. The monstrosity that you have to kill is partly your fault. As if that isn't bad enough, there is also a scream that comes in and out of the piece, like the anguished yells of your companions before they were consumed entirely by the plague. Reasoning with the Moonscorch at this stage is nearly impossible, though the worst part is that some of the contestants still retain a semblance of themselves that you can try to communicate with, and this realization coincides with the tension ramping up as the second phase of the music begins. The percussion now takes center stage, as you need to divorce your emotions from the truth that it's either you or them making it out. This isn't to say that the Moon Scorch was completely brain dead either though, since the plague amplifies their darkest fears rather than completely altering their personality. The desperation that the piece is named after could therefore be about both sides of the conflict, your desire to make it out alive and theirs to escape their innermost torment. And as the next few tracks serve to transition us into the endgame of Termina, I thought this would be the most appropriate time to cut the analysis. I honestly wish this video didn't take this long to put together, but wanting to use the feedback and reception of the first Fear and Hunger video, I was hoping to do right by the fanbase and take a lot of the positive and constructive criticism to heart. It was also through doing this project that I actually gained a vastly newfound appreciation for Termina, and so I wanted to make sure that my efforts showed at least a little bit. The main reason for splitting this video is also that I have some personal events going on, meaning I just can't work on this for another 2 months. And I feel like I've put it off long enough, so I wanted to at least upload what I had now. Not only that, but I'm kind of worried the Termina update might actually come out soon, and if I wait to upload all this in one part, then it'd be outdated by then, but I digress. If you made it this far, I do highly appreciate your time and attention though, and would love for any potential feedback or improvements I can make towards the second half of this project. I consider the 3 videos I have planned for Termina as sort of a love letter to the game, franchise, and its fans, so I would like for them to be as good as possible with your input. Either way, I want to thank everyone who has been watching, and I hope you all have a good one.